2050, the travel times for some of our key equity neighborhoods increases, not decreases, without additional investment.
So all of these trends are exacerbated by the amount of congestion we see on our streets. What you see on the screen is a graph comparing the number of showing the decrease in travel times and thus increasing congestion on the streets over the 8-year period from 2009 to 2017. I'm sure if we had updated data for 2019, we would see this graph would look even worse. And while this board has been really clear in all my years here that we're not solving congestion simply to move more cars or to move people faster, congestion has serious impacts on every user of the transportation system. Any muni bus that doesn't have the advantage of a red travel lane is sitting in that congestion, particularly downtown and south of Market. Our goods movement largely can't shift. Very few of our goods movement trips can shift modes. And most importantly, our most vulnerable travelers, pedestrians, seniors, people with disabilities, people on bicycles and scooters, are at much more risk when drivers are aggressive, and that increases under congested conditions. So this map you're seeing, if I was to put up a map of the high injury network, it would look a lot like the map on the right. The places where we have congestion are the places where we're seeing injuries, and they're the places where we're seeing transit service struggle to maintain its reliability. So those choices need to be built into all of our budget decisions and also our planning and engineering decisions. We also have a small army of folks within the agency, parking control officers, who are working to manage the level of congestion we have on the streets today. We have approximately 300 officers at full staffing today, and they're playing they are fighting the battle of figuring out how to keep those 400,000 cars from completely gridlocking the city. We are doing more and more what we call fixed post detail, which is officers. We're not writing tickets, not chasing double parkers, not enforcing yellow, white, red, and blue zones. But rather standing in the corner like the officer in the photo is here, and simply directing traffic, simply trying to get the streets unclogged so that people can move around. There's a lot of factors behind the congestion in the city. It's not just the 400,000 trips. It's not just the increase in auto mode share. It's also the amount of construction and the number of special events. This graph up here shows you over time how we've almost tripled the number of construction permits that have been pulled in the city since 2011. So if you walk or drive around downtown or ride Muni around downtown, it looks like the whole city's under construction. The whole city is kind of under construction, and keeping the streets safe outside those sites is a very labor-intensive job that our PCOs are being asked to do.
So with our existing resources, I think one of the key messages we're asking you to take away from this presentation is that we are not set up for success. And that is reflected in our on-time performance metrics, which are built into the charter and measure schedule adherence. We continue to hover around the mid-50s. I also wanted to flag, though, and you've heard me say this before, that I don't think that this is the best metric to understand our customer experience. And I think that is shown, if you see this red graph here, the rapid network, which we know has a very high level of customer satisfaction, is not doing much better in terms of schedule adherence. And that's in part because our system is too complicated to expect a single bus to be exactly on schedule every 3/4 of a mile. And when we're operating at a really frequent headway, for example, one traffic signal or one person who needs extra boarding time can really, really cause changes. But what the customers experience is still that there's very few gaps in service, and that we're doing what we need to manage the customer experience. I show this next graph to reinforce where I think we are having success on the rapid network on some of our express routes, but you'll also see the big discrepancy between the rail system and the rapid bus system, where we still are experiencing too long of wait times, large gaps in service. And the challenges that we're having on the rail system, as well as a lot of the bus system, that is not on the rapid network are really driven by two key things. One is the congestion piece, which Tom just touched on. And the second is, as I presented in November, we just do not have enough resources out there to manage the service that we have. I think a key example of this is the transition to the Transportation Management Center, which we also talked about in November. We got this amazing new piece of technology, and we disinvested in the number of staff to support that technology, and it was a false economy. It was not the right move. What we saw when we introduced the new radio and the new vehicle location system that the new TMC provides was a couple things. One, operator call volumes immediately went up. This is great news. It means that our staff has an easier time reaching the support that they need while they're operating essentially on their own through our very complex city streets. Also, the time per call went up. We used to just scribble on a quick piece of paper, I've got a vehicle here, this is the incident that they're experiencing. It gave us very little data and very little ability to spot trends and to prevent problems. But it was pretty quick. Now that we're entering the data into this system, the number of calls has gone up and the time per call has gone up. And then we've said to that same team, well, why aren't you using this great technology to manage the system? Well, it's in part because they can barely manage the call volumes from the operators, which is their first responsibility and critical to keeping the system safe, but doesn't get at the full potential where they have the picture in the sky. They can see when two trains are starting to get too close together. If they have the ability to look at it and they have somebody on the ground to partner with, they can make subtle changes so that the buses or the trains never get bunched in the first place, which means that we don't have to use bigger tools like doing switchbacks because we're preventing the problems before they start. So this is, I think, a really key area that I'm going to ask you to be focused on as we go through this budget period. Right now, operators can go through their whole day without an in-person contact, which doesn't provide proper accountability. It doesn't provide proper mentoring. Part of this problem is self-inflicted. You know, we have this amazing ladder of opportunity, but our operators become supervisors, become field managers, become managers. It's incredible, but if we're not feeding that pipeline, we end up with this kind of disproportionate set of vacancies. And then as we look in this area of insufficient resources, as I talked about, we don't want to just bring on people to fill spaces. We want to bring them on in a way that they can truly be successful. The hardest thing about our transit supervisors is that one day you're an operator, the next day you're supervising operators. That's a pretty big leap. And so while we do have some training programs, we're also going to be recommending some restructuring so that we're really giving people the tools they need to be successful supervisors and to really support the operators in the system in the way we need.
And that principle of the need to both increase our investment in both the number of people, but also the skills of our people, it applies to our meter plant as well. We have 26,000 parking meters in the city. We've seen a rash of vandalism take place over the last 3 years. The number of meters that are vandalized or damaged in some way, shape, or form on a given day is tripled. And while in the short term, the solution to that is putting a lot more, is a labor-intensive solution, we will be coming to you later this year to update and renew our parking meter contract, and that's an opportunity for us to make an investment in technology that is more rugged, more appropriate to the kind of behavior we're unfortunately seeing on the streets of San Francisco right now, but also gives customers more payment channels, more opportunities to pay, and gives the businesses who depend on that parking a greater likelihood of the curbs being available for their customers to come in. We go slightly out of order here, as I know we have just a minute or two left here. Sorry. So project delivery. we have made a lot of ambitious, exciting decisions at this board over the last few years, ever since we adopted both our transit effectiveness program and our Vision Zero goal. We have also struggled to get the changes, the decisions you've made. We've struggled to make those real and concrete and paint out on the streets. And I think there's a lot of reasons behind our challenges, and I think they're intertwined. There are things within the MTA and our fellow agencies that we need to build a culture of continuous improvement so that we are shortening the critical path to get our projects in the ground, finding ways to get our partners in places like Public Works and PUC more aligned with our schedule goals. There are also, I think we need to be honest with ourselves about the expectations we have about communications around these projects. We typically come to you with recommendations that are a result of very exhaustive public outreach processes. And you've set the expectation for us through the POETS program and through your comments at this board that we are reaching as many stakeholders as possible, having as many multiple rounds of robust conversations with them as possible. That's important, but we also know we want to get improvements on the ground quickly, and I hope that we can continue to talk as a board about how we can both be inclusive and be quick in getting a decision in front of the public and getting it implemented on the street. We're taking a great step tomorrow to quick build Better Market Street. We are going to get from your decision this fall to an actual closure to private car traffic in a matter of months. The complete build out of Better Market Street is going to take over 15 years. Even our standard streetscape projects, the really transformational stuff we're doing on Folsom and Howard, from the time you made the decisions about how those streets will look to the time they're finally done could be as long as 6 years. Now, our quick build program has shortened that time window by a whole order of magnitude. We're getting projects in the ground less than 6 months after we make decisions here as a board. Also point out that our rapid response team, which goes out after every fatality that takes place in our streets, is able to make admittedly more targeted engineering changes in just 72 hours. And thinking about how, if we're going to achieve our strategic goals, we have short time frames, and we need to make sure that the conversation about resources is also a conversation about getting them deployed quickly. Finally, I don't want to preempt a longer conversation later today about security and safety on the system, but we do have this paradox whereby, statistically speaking, crime is declining on Muni, but we know that our customers are telling us they feel less safe on the system. One of the really important findings of the Muni Working Group was that the MTA's security resources that we put out per passenger per capita is low compared to our peer systems. The security contract you approved in the fall will absolutely help us increase those resources, but we'll have some proposals this afternoon to make some real incremental but meaningful steps to move us forward. So I hope that didn't bring the room down too much, but that is what the challenge is that Jeff laid out at the beginning. That's what it means organizationally and operationally for us every day. And as we bring our perspective to the budget conversation, that's where we're looking for resources, and that's the kind of thinking that the proposals that you're going to be seeing over the rest of the day are coming from.
Very good.
Questions.
So thank you. Item 8 is a 3-part item, so public comment will come when we're done with the third part of it, but we are going to be changing players up here. Directors, are there any questions or comments for Director Eakett, please?
Just a couple of comments. First of all, just really appreciate your honesty and bringing forth the challenges. I don't think it helps any of us for you to sort of gloss over and present a rosy picture, so really appreciate it, and also the specific detail that went into preparing here. To me, the real standout is the 824 vacancies. That's about 20%, as I understand it, of the full workforce. So you're not fighting with a full team. There's no chance we can deliver on our mission. It seems to me also, and we're going to get into this later, that the 25 vacancies in HR, which probably are quite related to the 824 vacancies, are probably a first priority to fill. So I just want to underscore the need to move that forward. And really understand, and we've talked so much about operator vacancies. I hadn't seen the number of 186 vacancies in sustainable streets. That was another real standout. Love to understand more about the root of that problem. And then finally, on your comment on the balance between being able to expeditiously implement projects and public outreach, I think we're going to need to ask for a little bit more faith and trust from the public to be able to deliver on some of these goals. We've done a lot of vetting, a lot of public outreach on these goals, and we've got the goals and we've got agreement. I think we're going to need to ask for the public to almost give us a little bit more leash to move quickly to be able to deliver on some of those goals.
Very good. Anyone else? I know our finance team is chomping at the bit to get up here, but before you guys leave, I want to address one issue with you. And to me, is the most important thing that I'll probably bring up at this meeting. You have talked about three really core priorities that both of you share. As our new director said, we have a goal of protecting our buses and trains from congestion. We all know how important it is to protect our pedestrians and get to that zero number. And we all know how important it is to get to equity in our service. And you showed us a map where you could see quite visibly an area that's being underserved and an area that's facing significant pedestrian threats there in the, in the outer Mission area of the city. We have addressed all this before, and the last time we addressed it in full at the board, I asked you, as then Director of Transportation, to recognize that these 1,000 small changes that we've done are great, but it's time for big changes as well. And I asked that we be presented at this workshop with 4 options for the next Market Street, for the next car-free street in this city. My understanding is we will not hear those options today, that the planning isn't ready. And that's fine. I know there's no malice or ill will there on your part, but I will say I'm disappointed. And when you talk about the fact that rolling out Market Street is going to take 15 years, one could view that with frustration, and I have, and will push with my few remaining months to speed that up. But one could also view that as absolutely more reason that we need to get started on the next street now. When I look at that map, Valencia Street calls out to me. It calls out to me as an area where we have way too much pedestrian risk, where we have underservice, congestion, and underservice from an equity standpoint too. Just an idea to put out there. But I will say, and now with Director Tumlin in the room, and he and I, of course, have talked about this, I do think it is time for us to continue with these 1,000 small changes, and your surgical efficiency is one of the many reasons you have this job. But it's also time to start thinking about the big changes. I won't be here to see it happen. At least I won't be here in this capacity. Hopefully, I'll still be here as a San Franciscan. But I really do think it's time to start planning this. And so I'll just say publicly, I would like to renew my call for you to come to this board soon as you can, with options or proposals for what the next Market Street car-free zone should be. I don't know when that will be. I thought it was going to be today. It's not today. So when I say soon, I'm talking about a couple of board meetings if possible. And if not possible, since we've made this call publicly, explain to us and to the public why it's not possible, so that at least we and the public know that this isn't being ignored. Fair request?
Fair request. It's not being ignored. We will be before you this spring with a list of more than 4 options for a wide range of really aggressive treatments for making our streets work better.
Wonderful. Any other directors? Director Heminger?
Well, it's, I think, a bit of a friendly amendment. It's one thing to identify those routes, and it's fair to say that whichever ones you identify, we will encounter opposition. But it's another thing to say that we're sort of consigned to this paradigm of 15 years to do anything, even if we agree on one. And so, I mean, I would like to see not only those routes identified, but also a game plan for how to significantly reduce project delivery time. That will involve trade-offs that will also be controversial. But unless we're willing to say, this is how you might get there in our lifetimes, we're going to have commissioners serve on this board who never get to see anything done. Because, you know, the average lifespan of a project is longer than their tenure on the board.
Yep.
And that didn't make much sense either.
That is a most friendly amendment.
Noted.
Very good. Okay. Moving on to our, thank you both very much and for your dedication to our transit and our sustainable streets. We appreciate it. Our financial team. Leo, welcome.
Thank you very much, directors. This is very exciting for me to be here at my first budget workshop. I'm Leo Levinson, the CFO for the agency, and I have with me my 2 senior budget gurus, Jonathan Ruers, the senior budget financial planning and analysis manager, and Tim Manglitmott, the direct budget manager for the operating and capital budgets. And our purpose this morning is really to set the broader financial context And we'll dig more deeply into the details of the two-year budget before us in the afternoon. So this is really going to be a broad view. And where are we going? Let's get up to there. Okay, and you know, our situation is very similar to what you heard from Ben Rosenfield this morning about the city as a whole. Despite having years of a boom in the San Francisco economy, we still have an ongoing structural challenge with the pace of our expenditures rising faster than our revenues, and you'll hear about that. As Ben said, the short-term challenge is, I think you'll see we have strategies for managing the short-term challenge for our next two-year budget. Not all of them are simple, but there are strategies. The bigger concern, and we also want to talk about that, is the longer term. We will be hearing, and this is what I want you to be thinking about as you hear the next presentations that'll go into more detail about the things that we hope to do in this agency to provide our services to the public, and how we fit that tremendous value that we can provide the public with what we do. How do we get the long-term resources needed to realize that tremendous value, and how we persuade the public that, in fact, it's worth it. The type of resources we need to provide that value are substantial. Our job is to show that they are worth it and we're spending them wisely. And the two themes, again, that we want to think about is both sustainability, how do we have the resources we need to keep our operations going, and we also have the responsibility to keep in mind resilience. We will continue to provide those services in good times. We will have a downturn in the future, and our job is to provide you plans and options that can keep us sustainable and resilient. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to go into more of the picture.
Thank you, Leo. Good morning, directors. Jonathan Ruers, Senior Manager of Budget, Financial Planning, and Analysis. So the first slide continues the message and the theme that you've heard this morning. The city continues to grow. There's a higher level of expectations for the MTA with regard to the services it provides, but we have planning processes and things that the city has done to identify specifically what we need. So the Mayor's Transportation Task Force, then called on by President Breed when she was the president of the Board of Supervisors, and then Mayor Lee, identified a $22 billion gap to 2045. So that is known. There's been a thoughtful process to identify how we deal with that. So we know what it will take to fund the system that we all want in San Francisco. In addition, as Sarah Jones laid out earlier, we are going through the process of Connect SF to identify what things specifically want to do out to a 2050 period. So again, it is known what we need to do to this system to make it function and make it work. As Leo just pointed out, later on in the afternoon, we will cover the micro of the budget, but we did want to start here and show you kind of where we stand as a baseline. So in fiscal year 21, we are projecting a gap of $66 million that grows to $77 million in fiscal year 22. That is the work that will occur over the next couple of months. But as noted earlier, we do have a structural imbalance the same as the city. So again, our revenues are not growing at the same pace as our expenses. You will see that here. I do want to note there's one error on this slide where you see $47 million. That's a typo. It should be $77 million for fiscal year 22. But it will show you the pace of our expenditures versus our revenues here within the agency. Specifically, when looking at our revenues, we want to separate, and what we've done for the board is really show you the one-time revenue sources we have for our ongoing operations. And these here are largely showing our enterprise revenues. So those things, those revenues that the MTA raises as a business, as a pure business, the things that are under the control of this board. And you will see that when it comes to parking, fees, fares, and fines, and transit fare revenues, we have largely been flat in that area. And as Controller Rosenfield pointed out, this agency is becoming more and more dependent on the city's general fund, which again makes us more likely to be impacted during an economic downturn because the general fund fluctuates with the state of the economy. So for those of you who were on the board during the last economic downturn, there were tools that the agency could use to help blunt that situation and the downturn itself. Those tools are not going to be as available to you as they have been in the past. Just to further demonstrate this, we corrected the revenue amounts for 2019 dollars so you could get a real sense. Not only are they flat, in many areas the enterprise revenues are down. So again, you will see that general fund line continuing to grow and projected to grow. So again, the general fund and the growth of the general economy of San Francisco is what is helping us support our services to San Francisco. On the capital side, we go through an exercise with the city to update the city's 10-year capital plan. We will bring this forward to the city's capital planning committee in the next month. And when we update our 5-year capital revenues for projects specifically, we always do an update. And you will see here that we have the same pattern. Whereas we've corrected, getting a more realistic sense of where we are with capital revenues, that we're seeing across most fiscal years that those are down. You will see prior capital improvement programs. So this board approves a 5-year capital improvement program for all of the projects that the MTA delivers. You will see 2 CIPs ago that we had 367 projects for $3.4 billion. In the last CIP that the board approved, that was down to 266 projects for $3 billion. And currently, we're proposing a 5-year capital improvement program of $2.5 billion of 157 projects. Now, I do want to state that, again, at the macro, a lot of that has to do with we received a lot of one-time funding from the region and from the voters, the $500 million general obligation bond that was passed in 2014. We went through a cycle of replacing our rubber tire fleet, in which we received a lot of federal funds from the region and from the FTA to help support that. So we are past that peak of capital investment, so we're returning more to a steady state of what we would expect. However, those one-time infusions were one time, and so it's time for us to consider other alternatives to continue to meet the needs of the infrastructure of the system. This fall, the board reviewed our capital plan and approved an update of that plan that showed that the needs of the system over the next 20 years had grown by $9 billion. This chart breaks down the specific capital areas of infrastructure need that the system has, but just wanted to point out, again, we know where we need to invest in the system. We know where the dollars can go and how we can use them. So again, we want to talk about how we can actually increase revenues and what opportunities we might have. Lastly, we did want to prepare a recession scenario for you. We did an analysis based on the prior downturn. If we were to see similar economic conditions that we saw in the fiscal year 2009 and 10 period, we would likely see an overall impact to the agency of approximately $200 million. There would be an increase in costs due to benefit and retirement contributions that we would see, and a $158 million reduction in revenue. And again, that is due to the general fund. We become so dependent on it, this is what we would anticipate we would lose, again, during an economic downturn. This gets to the point that Leo brought up about creating resiliency within our budget and making sure that we have the reserves in place that if this were to happen, the disruption to service to the city is reduced to the greatest extent possible. Lastly, again, I want to cover, there have been processes to look at what revenue sources that we might look to be able to fund the needs that we know the system has. So we started off with Transportation 2030. That was the first Mayor's Transportation Task Force. And out of that specific plan, we saw Proposition A pass with 71% of voters supporting a $500 million investment in the transportation system. That was our first $500 million general obligation bond. We saw Proposition B pass, and that's got the support of 61.4% of voters, and that increased our general fund set aside, correcting what we got related to the population of San Francisco. So again, correcting the general fund set aside to the actual population and growth that the city was seeing. As part of that overall plan, there was a proposal for a vehicle license fee. That was not pursued, so that is now off the table. However, it has been discussed. And then there was a follow-up most recently, as I noted, with Mayor Lee and then President Breed calling together again a transportation task force to look at the needs, possible revenue options for the system in the San Francisco 2045 Transportation Task Force. From that particular plan, we had Proposition J and K move forward, which was a sales tax proposal that failed. If you look specifically, when voters were asked for the dedication of taxes for the transportation system, it actually passed with 67% of the vote. So the voters knew what they were supporting, and they were supportive of it. It was a split ballot initiative, so you could argue that maybe there was some confusion, but the actual tax component of that initiative, which was Proposition K, failed. So the dedication of funds for transportation and the voters' support of it absolutely passed, and they knew what they were investing in. The tax itself, because there were two items on the ballot, unfortunately didn't pass, so that effort did not succeed. However, most recently in 2018, we had the TNC tax pass, so that we have included that as revenue in the upcoming budget, both $15 million for transit, and then the Transportation Authority will program the $15 million related to Vision Zero. There were other elements in that program that we should look forward to and that we should advance. And those are included here. So we have worked with the city to advance our next general obligation bond forward 2 years. So instead of waiting 10 years, we will only wait 8, and the next $500 million general obligation bond is planned for June 2022. We have been talking about an additional sales tax in light of Proposition J and K, whether or not we would have the ability to move that forward based on the need. Congestion pricing is moving forward as a study at the Transportation Authority. And then within that plan, there was discussion of a community benefit district, looking at ways that the city, through a community benefit district, could support the infrastructure that we have here at the MTA, the rail, the overhead, and the traffic signals. Other opportunities include the reauthorization of the Proposition K sales tax that will have to happen at some point. A new expenditure plan will have to go to the voters. That is not a tax increase. It simply reallocates the existing sales tax that the voters have approved, but we again could consider adding another quarter or half cent on top of that at the appropriate time. And then, of course, as the agency always does, we are trying to be very aggressive with federal and state grants. As those come up, we bring in anywhere from $30 to $100 to $200 million in competitive grants per year, and we will continue to pursue that both at the federal and state level. So with that, kind of our recommendation and closing, again, at the macro level of finance here for the agency is we've gone through the process. We know the tools that we can use. Those both were identified in Transportation 2030 and Transportation 2045. We should, over the next 2 years, aggressively pursue those revenue options to support the things we already know we need to do. And we should also consider strong advocacy, both at the federal and state levels, for the resources that San Francisco needs for the transportation system. Any questions?
Excellent. Yes, Director Torres.
Given the tax revenue that you cited, the sales tax, obviously the debt service on the general obligation bonds, what's the actual cost to the average San Franciscan of all those other costs, aside from the horrendous property taxes we pay here?
Yes, that's a good question. What happened in the Transportation 2030 process, the original Mayor's Transportation Task Force, is for the first time in, I think, almost 20 years, the MTA was made part of the city's regular general obligation program, the cycle of GO bonds that you see on the ballot for recreation and parks. The most recent one was related to housing. There is a fixed limit that the city uses to kind of recycle that program that does not lead to a property tax increase. So as bonds are retired, the next bond in the program comes up. So we were lucky enough through advocacy and the support of the mayor's office to be added to that program on a regular basis. So with regard to the general obligation bond, that is built into the system of the city for capital investments. The agency itself does invest in a revenue bond program, and we do have debt service that we continue to pay on that. It is a tool that, in the case of large capital investments that are required, that we can select to use. The current debt service, Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, is around $24 million per year on the operating budget. So we always need to balance the need for service, the need for day-to-day operations against the cost of debt service.
Over what period of time, $22 million a year?
I believe that is out to 2034.
It's a 20-year revenue bond.
Yeah.
A 20-year revenue bond, all right. Thank you.
Director Brinkman.
Thank you. Good presentation. The vehicle license fee, if I remember correctly, we were enabled to do that via state legislation.
Correct.
Is that legislation evergreen, or is that going to expire at some point? And will we sort of consider taking advantage of that?
My understanding is that it did not expire, that it allowed San Francisco County to increase the vehicle license fee to its prior levels prior to the Schwarzenegger administration reducing it. There was a debate at the time between Proposition B, which was that kind of increase of the general fund set aside, and the vehicle license fee. They were kind of comparative efforts. Transportation 2030 assumed 3 different revenue sources: the general obligation bond, a sales tax measure, and the VLF. So many consider that Proposition B sort of switched that out, but that is still a measure that can be used if needed.
Good, that's good to know it doesn't expire. And then one other thing that's kind of more of a comment that would be interesting for us to consider. I know that Hong Kong, for example, actually makes money on their real estate. They've built big things above their stations. They have offices, they have hotels. And when we consider our MTA property, and we do have to consider, as we always say, the best and highest use of that, and maybe we have to consider the balancing of building housing versus building things that actually generate revenue for the agency. Because it seems like there is a big opportunity there, particularly with some of the parking garages we have. As we see the parking usage go down and down, that opens up the ability to use that property for something else.
Yeah, we are reviewing our entire portfolio, and that is something we will definitely be making proposals and seeking board direction back on, is the best use of our real estate portfolio.
Thank you.
Director Inkin.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to sort of observe a tension between this presentation and the presentation from Sarah Jones and her team, which is, I just heard you say, Jonathan, that we know where we need to invest in the system, and so we have these very clear budget projections and our revenue and our gap projections. I also heard Sarah and her team say, we do not know how to get to 80%. We do not know how to hit objective 2.2 in our strategic plan, which is to hit the 80% sustainable mode share. We don't have a clear pathway, and we're still figuring that out. So I think there's like a little bit of a tension there, and it just seems obviously you'll need to stay closely integrated with the sustainable streets and transit planning teams. It may be that the gap here is, I would guess the gap is more significant than we're projecting, because we'll need to make more investments to get us on that 80% path.
Yes, one of the trade-offs here, I think when we're looking at state of good repair, often we're looking at the investments needed to keep our current assets functioning properly and to their best use for the system. And that is always in tension with the desire to make further improvements and major initiatives that can improve the transportation system in San Francisco, but maybe drawing upon the same capital funds that we use just to make sure our parking meters are refreshed and are operating with current technology, as opposed to having new parking meters somewhere, or a totally different system of curb management.
And I would add, you're absolutely correct. I think the numbers we're showing you today reflect the planning efforts of the day up to this point. So as Leo noted, there's the state of good repair of the system. There are the enhancements to the system that we have continuously committed to make, both through Muni Forward, through our prior bicycle strategy, through the Vision Zero program. We will continue to do those. Connect SF will identify the next generation of projects. And I don't know that we yet have a number to tie to that, but that is forthcoming.
Director Borden.
I have a question about Faster Bay Area and what's going on with that, and what we anticipate that we would get from that funding source if it were to become available.
I might want Jeff to speak to that a little. What I can tell you is that we, on the finance side of the table, get very nervous about adding what we would call in speculative revenue, or making commitments to operational expenditures or capital projects pending a decision by the voters.
Right.
We absolutely have taken it into consideration, and there are programs related both to operations and equity across the system with regard to fares. We have advanced a list with the Transportation Authority of high priority capital projects that we would want to implement, and the resources sort of out of that needs list you saw, the $30 billion of kind of the big dollars we would require to move those projects forward. I think there are still outstanding questions about when it might be on the ballot, and so for us on our side, like what year revenue would show up and what we could spend it on is still difficult. Jeff, if you want to add anything.
So the team that's putting together the Faster Initiative is still trying to target November 2020. Given the amount of work that remains to be done and the consensus that needs to be achieved throughout the region, I think we would be wise not to count on that revenue coming in this budget cycle. So I think our approach is conservative. If it does make it on the ballot and it passes, we'll be delighted to come back to you for an amendment to our budget that accelerates some of our major capital projects.
Great, thanks.
And if I could just ask you to illustrate a broader point, which has certainly been a lesson of mine, but over the years, but you can speak to it better, I'm sure, Leo, which is this. At the same time, we're saying we're facing an undue level of pedestrian deaths and an undue level of congestion and all of these needs. And some of us, at least on the planning side, calling for big and bold action. We also have what Jeff just summarized as the importance of conservative budgeting and conservative finances. And I suspect as we call for some of these big things, there will be, as there has been in the past, calls to do things like speculative budgeting or to get into our fund reserve and to do all of these things. But I think that, from my perspective, the staying conservative actually saves money and enables us to do these things because we keep our bond rating and we do all the things that keeps things inexpensive. And they also allow us, because I think I'm the only one who sort of was working through the last real recession when we had to hit that fund balance to keep service going. So I've sort of answered the question myself, but I recognize that tension, and I just want to make sure that you agree that there's room for bold planning, but at the same time, in the long run, the conservative budgeting and the conservative treatment of those issues is going to be what's best for the agency.
I do agree. I do think there is always a matter of policy and art as to how you actually define conservative. And I feel like my role, number one, is transparency, to share what our resources are and what the decisions are. A second one is to be keeping tabs on what happens, because as Ben said, we don't forecast recessions. We don't know when things could change dramatically in our forecasts. The only thing we know is that we can't predict exactly what's going to happen, but what we can do is to keep our eyes on what's going on and come back to you if something changes. And so I think it is very much one of the board decisions how much we keep in reserve versus how much we use right now to provide the services we want to provide. And we'll be providing options in that regard, hopefully transparency, and we'll talk together about where that decision, the sweet spot is.
Perfect. That frames it much better than I did, but it was exactly the framing I wanted. Thank you. Director Heminger.
Yeah, I wanted to return to Ben Rosenfield's point about how dependent we've become on general fund revenue. If I'm reading your slide 52 correctly, it looks like the two enterprise sources, the parking fees and the muni fares, have declined by about 20% over that period in real terms. So I guess two questions I have for you. One, it would help me as the rookie commissioner to understand how the indexing policy works with fares. And secondly, have we ever considered, or do we have an indexing policy for the parking fees?
First of all, we will be having more discussion about fares later in the afternoon, so I don't think we might not want to go in detail here.
Well, just explain how it works. How's the indexing policy work on muni fares?
I can I stand to be corrected if necessary
It's
by
linked to
staff
the
in terms of the
labor.
details, but
Yeah.
basically by cost of living
Plus
at
labor.
certain increments. So we wouldn't go up by on say a cash fare by more than by less than a 25-cent increment.
So you store them up.
But it's set to track the CPI labor.
Correct.
It's
So there are two specific elements. Again, CPI, so just generally the state of the economy, and the cost of labor. So in this particular cycle, we just went through a bunch of new labor agreements that were approved. We've priced that in. So between CPI and labor, those two things combined have triggered the automatic indexing policy in this cycle.
Yeah. Now,
And then do we have one for parking?
Well-
And have we ever considered it?
Are you talking about like fines on parking violations?
Fines,
And that's,
meter rates, whatever?
the answer is yes.
well, I think meter rates are also have I'm getting a sign to move forward, but we also have a parking congestion objective around meter rates, so that there's a more nuanced look at what do meter rates need to be to meet the demand in that particular area, as opposed to because there's much more demand response there.
So there is an indexing policy for parking, or
It's
there
a
isn't?
congestion pricing parking, basically, is what we have.
Okay.
Well,
So it's, and so
There's a
it's
lot of
different
different things
Right.
filtering in, and I'm sensing Roberta saying, we're gonna cover this later, so move on. Am I getting it right?
That is correct. We'll definitely cover that later, but generally on parking, and Tom McGuire can cover more of this, parking is priced based on demand. That's generally how we do it, and the board has laid out the ability for us to adjust the prices based on demand.
And there is sort of values-based parking adjustments that will be talked about based on the needs of the system that may also have revenue implications, and we're going to talk more about that today.
Any further questions for our financial team? Wonderful, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move to the next.
So
Yes.
I'm gonna keep us
Jonathan
moving
stays.
as quickly as possible. I know this has been a topic of interest for the board. The agency has been working to create an asset management strategy. So in an environment in which we have limited resources, how can we ensure we get the maximum amount of the investment that we do put into our various assets across the agency? So simply put, we want to move away from a reactive situation in which we do have sudden breakdowns and failures in the system to being more in a preventative maintenance type of situation. That is the objective, and this is exactly the direction we intend on moving in. We have developed Federal law has required us to do this. We recently did a transportation asset management plan. It was something required in the last federal bill. And so we have developed a 10-year asset management strategy in which we will consistently update the data regarding our assets. We know when things need to be replaced. We know what the cost of them are. We have implemented a specific program in this budget to continue the evaluation of the operational condition of our assets, meaning not just how old is it, but how is it functioning in the system. So again, we can target the resources to where it's actually needed. So I don't want to get into too much of this, but we have this strategy in place. We are moving it forward. There will be a follow-up report on our 2019 State of Good Repair report. But to give you a little background, I'm turning it over to Jared Weiner, who is our manager of asset management.
Weiner,
Weiner.
no relation to
My-
Scott.
yeah.
So every year we develop the State of Good Repair report, and the State of Good Repair report takes a look at all of our capital assets. It kind of takes a holistic view of all of the agency's assets. It looks at things like useful life. It looks at things like replacement cycles, rehab cycles, and we can kind of project out the need of what we need to make sure that our assets are operating in a condition so that their performance meets the service that the agency is promising to deliver. I think that's the big thing. So we've made it a commitment to spend $250 million a year on State of Good Repair to keep those assets in good condition, and that's just saying, we know we build and we maintain a lot of stuff, and as we're putting new stuff out there, we have a target that we want to reach to make sure we're maintaining the stuff we already have. And the other big thing about this report is it also talks about, okay, so we're spending a certain target on SGR, but is it going into the right spots? Is it going into the spots where we're getting the most value and performance from the right assets so that it really supports what the agency says we're trying to do? And so that's the big thing, is making sure that we're putting the money in the right spot at the right time. And so that's really what our report and our analysis tries to do. Oh, you did? All right. So here we have basically our 2016 and our 2018 State of Good Repair analysis. And what this shows is a couple different funding levels. The top one, basically anytime we miss a replacement cycle, we defer maintenance, all of that, that value gets put into our backlog and something we need to catch up on. And so our backlog grows because every year our assets age and we're in a constrained resource environment, so we can't necessarily hit every single asset and refresh it at the right time. But you can see basically it's growing and it's a large number. And so I think the next thing is basically, so there's a couple things. Our backlog grows, but there's other ways that we can look at our backlog, and that's kind of what our team is kind of tasked with, is look at that backlog. What are the assets that are coming up? And I'll transition it over to Jim to talk about the backlog.
Yes, and this slide speaks a little bit about the assets that make up the backlog. And again, this is a backlog of deferred state of good repair investments. As you can see, that backlog has been growing year over year. However, the type of assets that make up the growth in the backlog are mostly targeted on other non-transit service critical assets. The smaller blue section are the transit service critical assets. Those have not been growing as much in the past. So we are up to a $3.13 billion backlog of state of good repair investments as of 2018. The largest growth area for that backlog has been parking and traffic assets, which is considered not transit service critical, as are stations and facilities. And then the next transit service critical asset type is overhead lines, and that has been growing as well. Here you can see the actual investment of number of dollars spent in state of good repair over the past 5 years. You will see that the dollars spent per year have been growing pretty much every single year. You can see where those investments are targeted right now. And you will see also that where we have not targeted our investments, we have seen the biggest impact on the growth of the backlog from the previous slide.
All right, so as part of our work plan, what we're going to do is we're working on our 2019 State of Good Repair report. And so I think what the asset management group's really also trying to do is to understand, make sure that we're putting the investments in the right spot, but being able to show the impacts of those investments based on the condition and performance of those assets, but then also being able to articulate what happens when we make business decisions to not fund certain areas and to maybe defer some maintenance or defer replacement. How does that impact the system, and how does that reflect our values as an agency? So as part of our work, we've funded a condition assessment program to really understand and get a baseline data on certain capital programs that maybe don't have full condition assessment information, so that we can, again, make business decisions based on that. And then we are also doing a traffic signal condition assessment, so it'll help us plan new inventory and just make sure we have an accurate picture of what's going on. I think that's the whole thing, is we really want to get a higher resolution look at our system, the physical things we maintain, so that we can say it's time to replace, it's time to rehab, or it's time to build up the staff in order to maintain these things in a condition so that it meets our expectations. And then we're also, my team's working on a work with the parking meter group to kind of address their failure rate and understand their business processes to see how we can make sure our parking meters are operating at a high level.
Okay,
Any questions?
very good. Directors, any questions for our team here? And this will take us to public comment. Director Eakin?
Can you give us a little more detail on what that 950 million parking and traffic assets, what that entails? Just unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So as Jim pointed out, we categorize state of good repair in two categories: transit service critical and non-transit service critical assets. So we've made it a priority to put the dollars in things that really are forward-facing and impact the service. The decision was made that our parking and traffic assets are not transit service critical assets. So those include the parking garages. They include all the traffic signals. They include our signs. We recently included all the paint in our inventory as of last year. The parking garages are a massive asset and are extremely expensive. We have been putting limited dollars into their condition, but nowhere near the level based on their age and where they should be. So parking garages, as noted, are one of our most expensive and high dollar assets, but the state of good repair of them have not been keeping pace. So all our parking traffic signals, paint, signs, meters, parking garages are all within the parking and traffic asset category.
Thank you.
Directors, any other questions? If not, we will move to public comment on all of item number 8.
We'll start with Joel Comisher, who turned in a speaker card on this topic.
Hi, I'm the school crossing guard at 19th and Judah and a member of SEIU Bargaining Committee. I talked fast, but I couldn't get in all of my points in the 2 minutes I had allotted to you. But I think it's timely about your sign about noting fatalities are not declining fast enough, and I believe The crossing guards are a relatively simple, low-tech solution. I can't count how many times I've told somebody, don't step off the curb. That car is not stopping for the light. And every time we prevent an accident, as I said, it's cost-effective because often lawyers try to blame the city to make a collection, so there is some saving on that. And I think increasing our presence, as I've said before, is a valuable tool in helping Vision Zero meeting its goals. And I believe it's a conservative approach. As I said, sometimes you have to spend a little money to save money, although we're not trying to be a cheaper alternative to the parking control officers. I do understand the limited resource, and there's a lot of competition for money, but I do hope that you'll find a way to increase our hours, because that also keeps the workforce up, and then they have to spend less on recruiting new guards, and it helps our guards, many of whom are low-income people, to have that extra money to survive in an increasingly expensive city. So again, I hope you'll keep an open mind, and I hope it's not too late to find some funding for us in the current budget, and we'd love to hear your thoughts if possible.
Thank you very much, and thank you to you and your colleagues for keeping my children safe every morning. I appreciate it. Ms. Mays.
Yes. Our budget document is a value statement. And in that, equity by design is something that needs to be addressed. We show the pink areas that haven't been addressed. ADA and universal design. And one of the things is we talk about these street closures, the scooters and the biking spending, infrastructure need to be really brought out because we're spending a lot of money on these things, but we have not figured in the ADA or universal design. We're taxing the car, but those of us who live in District 6, 5, and 10 have to often go to the car as a result, and we're having the brunt of these issues. We need to look at, as the cash fare, there's a regressive tax on using cash fare, things of these types of things that are equity issues. Also, 80% of the funds are coming from the general fund, as we've discussed. We need to look at LMI products and disabled passes and things, and free transit. These products aren't often available other than the website. So really looking at ways that we can really get that information out there. And so one of the things that I asked of this board is we need a breakout of how much money we're spending on scooters and biking infrastructure and Market Street, and looking at this so that we can make sure that we have universal design baked in from the start and it's not an afterthought, and that the scooter and bike programs also make sure that we have ADA, because we don't have enough ADA products available for scooter and biking, and also LMI products that look at the use of the low-income products. And so if we could really start making those, baking those in from the start, and not an afterthought after the pilots are going, but the pilots are going along with that. Thank you.
Mr. Strauss.
Good morning, Peter Strauss. Since retiring, I've been putting a lot of time into trying to secure funding, particularly funding for transit operations. As part of that, I've been working with the group Voices for Public Transportation, working on the regional transportation measure that you referred to a couple of times. Voices for Public Transportation is a coalition of community advocacy, labor, and other organizations. I think you're right not to bake this into the budget at this point. There's nothing set at this point, but one thing I want to underscore is one of the things that Voices has been working on, advocating strongly, is to strike the right balance between that funding being available for capital and for operating purposes. LA, for instance, made 25% of its funds available for operations. We're asking that if there is a regional transportation measure, that 30% of those funds be made available for operations. It's essential. Muni is not the only agency in the Bay Area facing a structural deficit. It's not even in the worst shape. That's something that all transit agencies in the Bay Area are facing to a greater or lesser extent. So securing adequate funds for operations is a key part, and I just want you to know that that's a key part of our platform and what we are seeking if this measure develops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Radulovich?
Good morning, Tom Radulovich with Livable City. We've been looking a lot at this, it's actually an MTA planning document. It's the Transportation Sector Climate Action Strategy. This gets you to 80%. This tells you the breakdown of the different modes and getting you to 80%. But the problem is, 2030 is now 10 years away. And your 10-year planning documents, your SRTP and CIP, there's a business as usual scenario that's assumed in there that's not 80% sustainable mode. So one thing that we would love you to do is, basically just make 80% your baseline budget, right? That's going to be business as usual rather than business as usual is something else. At the very least, make it a scenario. We did this at BART. You develop a scenario budget to say, okay, you have a fiscally constrained document. SRTPs and CIPs have to be fiscally constrained and balanced budget and so on. But what would it cost to get to 80%? You need to make some big investments in operations. Operation needs to be a lot more buses on the street. You need to make some big capital investments. You need to make some decisions about allocating road space in this city. So road space in key corridors would have to go to transit. But at least saying, here's what it costs would be good. There are some benefits, as this points out. An 80% sustainable mode shift makes a healthier city. It makes a more sustainable city. It's going to make a more equitable city. You could begin to quantify those benefits. Some of your costs go down. A lot fewer automobile trips means a lot less road wear and tear. All of those kinds of traffic management costs, those kinds of things also go down. You could begin to understand what those savings would look like. So we do ask, though, that budget be developed. So it's out there. The city has declared a climate emergency. This 80% mode shift goal is a big part of that. We think it is a climate emergency. We think it's important. We think you should take it seriously. And doing that means planning for that 80% mode shift goal and showing the city, here's what we need as an agency to get to 80%. We can do it. Cities with fewer resources than us have done it.
Thank you,
but you
Tom.
just need to show what needs doing.
Thank you. Mr. Feinbaum.
Thank you. Big wins with small dollars. I think that's a goal that we could all share. And one of the big wins I think MTA and Muni could achieve is longer trains through the Muni Metro system. I think it can be achieved through en-route coupling. Maybe some of you have heard me say this before, but being able to couple trains at the West Portal and Dubose would effectively increase the capacity at the Muni Metro. It was designed to accommodate 4 and, if you look creatively, even 5-car trains. If we were able to run 4 and 5-car trains, not only would that increase the capacity, but it would decrease the load on the automated train control system so that our current system may be functional a lot longer. I think this is a win that we could achieve with rather limited dollars. I'd like to see you included in your coming budget, at least to the extent that you provide some funds for doing testing with the new Siemens cars and actually doing perhaps some operational testing. This is as I say, a win that I think is achievable, and I hope you'll program it in for the next fiscal year. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, welcome.
Good morning. Jody Medeiros, Walk San Francisco. Thank you all for having this hearing this morning. I think it's really important to have this as a public discussion. I did want to say that we are not hitting Vision Zero in those goals, and that is evident. Pedestrians are still our most vulnerable. And I do want to point out that we do have a known solution that we are disinvesting in, and we need to start looking at this, and that is traffic signal evaluation. Happy to see that there is going to be an evaluation in 2019, but our traffic signals are old and not meeting really the needs that we have. And I do want to encourage this body, with all the competitive needs for funding, that traffic signals do get a higher priority, because this could lead us to reducing the conflict between cars and pedestrians, particularly at intersections where most of our pedestrians are being hit and killed, and even severely hurt. So thank you very much, and hope that consideration is put
Thank
out there
you,
today.
Jody, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thanks for all you did to make that a reality.
Good morning, Howard Strassner. Finally, we see that your parking revenue is going down. This should have been expected for a long time as the TNCs went up. Why would someone want to pay $20 or $30 a day when they can get a couple of rides for $15 or something like that? So this goes back, I don't know if you can get the right, some controls on this situation from the state. They finessed us. They knew we would probably want to do something, and they finessed us. Maybe you can get some controls back from the state. The other thing that was mentioned is you're considering traffic signals as a low importance. Actually, I would say they should be much higher importance because you want to try and get priority signals to help the buses. So that should really, that's going to be a small, low-cost thing or medium-cost thing that'll really help the system. And then finally, I want to thank Bob for bringing up more coupling and uncoupling because it will save the subway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Strassner. Mr. Mason, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Edward Mason. I'd like to congratulate being able to come up with a state of good repair program because I don't think you really did it for the brightest. But my real concern is rail slapping. And you say, what's rail slapping? Rail slapping is when the ties and the rail separate. There was about $500,000, and I have to go back and research it, at 24th and Church for the J Church line to repair that intersection because of rail slapping. That was done less than 2 years ago. Guess what? With 100 buses, I assume, commuter buses, we now have rail slapping. And I have to go back to Muni now, to the track department, and let them know that they need to come out and reevaluate that process. So the bottom line is, we established for $2.2 billion a regional transit center. Why is regional transit in the neighborhoods with commuter buses? So the consequence is you go to 24th and Castro, we put in all of this fancy continental sidewalk. It's all been eroded by those buses making the right-hand turn to go up the hill and coming down the hill to make the left-hand turn in the morning. So the bottom line is, we talk about all of this maintenance. Well, do we look at what's causing the problems? So rail slapping, that's another $250,000 project to go in and repair 24th and Church now. That's going to have to be done. So I think we need to look at the big picture, especially on regional transit, and why we're having this situation going on. Because we're going to pour the money in. And that money was 0.5% sales tax out of Prop K, out of this transportation authority. And the reason I'm intimately familiar with it is because I'm attending the CAC meetings and find out how Muni is spending the TA's money. Thank you.
Mr. Mason. All right, seeing no further public comment on item number 8, I think, unless board members insist on taking a break, we will proceed to goal 1, which is safety. Is that okay with you, Ms. Boomer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
This next presentation, Mr. Chair, Directors, there will be a break for lunch.
very good.
30 minutes.
Okay.
Item 9, presentation discussion regarding the SFMTA strategic plan goal 1, including an update on Vision Zero and improving transit security.
Good morning.
Hello there.
It's on? All right.
Yes, it is.
I guess I'm looking at these slides. Where's the clicker? Is this it? All right. Okay. Hi, all. I'm Chava Cronenberg. I'm the pedestrian program manager. I'm joined today by my colleague John Knox-White, who is the planning programs manager, and we're going to talk about Vision Zero. And I'm going to be fairly brief in my overview comments because most of you sat through about 2 hours of this presentation earlier this fall, and also I think I'm probably going to be duplicating some of the things you've already heard this morning. But I'm happy to go into more detail if I go a little too quickly. So we're extremely pleased to be goal 1.1. What will it take to end traffic fatalities and reduce severe injuries on the streets of San Francisco? So you all heard last year was a really challenging year for us. 29 fatalities, many critical injuries. That's certainly disappointing. I do want to say from our infrastructure, our project delivery perspective, we implemented some of our most ambitious projects ever. So Townsend is an unaccepted street, and we got to a point where we said we really don't know how to move forward with this project, and we figured out ways. We worked with our colleagues, and currently we're pouring concrete, creating a safe walkway where there wasn't one, creating a safe bicycle connection to our transit hub. We put in our fastest project ever built, our fastest protected bike lane. We did planning, design, and construction in about 10 weeks. We've had some of our broadest public participation in the process. Some of you attended our Page Street open house, and that's a long requested project, and we had over 100 neighbors come to talk about that project. So from that perspective, we see a lot of progress, and we think we're moving in the right direction. We released our 2019 Vision Zero Action Strategy, which is intended as a broad blueprint for how we're getting to zero. And it has 4 broad prongs of work. And I haven't been here in attendance for all of this meeting, but I do want to say that I heard in the time I was here a big perspective about what we call complementary goals. Like, what are we doing to get to our 80% mode shift goal? What are we doing to think about climate action? How are all these things interconnected? We also have strategic actions and transformative policies that I'm going to be spending just a second on. And lastly, I was glad to hear even just a quick conversation about equity. Anything we do needs to not exacerbate the existing inequities on the street. So whether that's a project, a policy, or a program of Vision Zero, that's our commitment. So whether you live on 6th Street or 6th Avenue, your outcomes are the same, that you are equally safe in the city. And right now that is not a true statement, and that is the goal that we are working towards. And this is not just an MTA project. We're joined by our colleagues across the city, including the police department, our public health department, which co-chairs the Vision Zero Task Force with me, public works, planning, among many, many others. I believe Tom and Julie covered the top half of these slides, which is, how did we do on our strategy? So which strategic actions have we made bold progress on? But they probably didn't allude to the work that is not of the SFMTA, but we're working diligently with the SFPD to get them to their focus on the 5 goals. We're working with our city administrator who procures city fleet, and so that's vehicles that are on the road every day. And now devices that were not in our city fleet, basic safety tools, are now going to be installed as we purchase every new city fleet vehicle. So that means the cars the city is putting on the road are going to be safer for everyone. And we've been evaluating all of our projects comprehensively. And so we're trying to say, how are we doing as we implement our projects? And I think this is a story that is going to be told over and over again, but we know that when we put in the projects that we are putting in, that we are seeing measurable and qualified success, that we are seeing on Turk Street a 287% increase in the number of people riding on that street because it's a safe place to ride, and it's our first protected bicycle facility in the Tenderloin. And it's not only there for the neighbors, but also just connecting people across the city to the places they want to go in a sustainable way. But people don't want to take a bicycle when it isn't safe. And so making safe streets for everyone, whether you're on a bike, whether you're walking, scooter, whether in a car, that is our commitment, and these projects are getting us there. And so what we know that means is we need to do more of these faster, right? And we're starting to get there. Beyond our infrastructure projects, of which you hear quite a bit, and I think you'll hear more about today, we outlined 4 bold policies that we needed state action on. And we've actually seen a lot of progress. I believe Kate Breen talked to you all in December about our policy agenda. And we're starting to see real movement in the state in terms of our changing the 85th percentile rule, which would allow us a lot more discretion and flexibility in reducing speed limits in streets that we know the speed limit is too high, and currently state law prevents us from reducing any further. So, a floor of 25 is where we're at for most streets. And sometimes 20 is the right speed for cars to be going, for everyone to be safe. And without that, we can't move ahead. And we are really proud of our state delegation, and we're really proud of the work that's happening at the State Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force, of which Kate Breen is a member, my colleague Megan Weir is a member, and we're getting a lot of traction there. We're eagerly awaiting the release of the report and the recommendations of the state to determine how we move forward on legislation related to that. And we're also encouraged that automated speed enforcement continues to be part of the conversation. These are proven tools that reduce fatalities. And as long as our hands are tied, we will struggle to meet our Vision Zero goal. And so I'm appreciative of so many of you in this room for making progress in moving all of these forward. I think a lot of you have all talked about our TNC regulations as well, so I'm not going to belabor this point. Again, this is our complementary goal. So, our statement is Vision Zero is not a policy in an island. We work with every other goal in the same way that other policies work with us. So if we got to our 80% sustainable modes goal, I believe we would see significantly reduced fatalities. When people are traveling on buses, when people are traveling by foot, they aren't getting hit by cars, and especially if there are fewer cars. And further, all those sustainable goals work towards our climate policies. And so we need these to trend in the right direction. So of course, it's really discouraging to see our mode shift goal going in the opposite direction. And I'm encouraged that my colleagues are working hard to change that course of action. So we have two asks, or I have two asks, and then John will be making a broader ask about our education program. And so this is three asks, but I think we only have one ask specifically related to the new Prop D. So again, encouraging, and we've heard about our structural deficits and our broader deficits, but when we put transportation ballot measures on the ballot, rather, they are traditionally successful. They've done really well, and actually that's true nationally. I think I saw a statistic that like 93% of local transportation funding has been approved by voters when it is put on the ballot, and that's because these kinds of goals resonate with voters. And so in November, the city of San Francisco passed Prop D, which is a tax on our ride-hailing services. And so our recommendation from the staff level, and I'm glad to hear Jody echo this, is first of all to create a sustainable funding source for our Quick Build program. So again, you've all heard a lot about our Quick Build program, and I'm going to gloss over it in this exact second. But it was funded through Prop K, through a one-time $5.5 million grant earlier this year. But we're looking for a sustainable source and one that understands the flexibility of the program, that it has to adjust and change, and it's not going to be a traditional design, construct project with a contract necessarily. And so we're recommending, of the projected $15 million dedicated to street safety, that $7.5 million of that be just directly attached to our Quick Build program and give us the flexibility to get these projects in the ground quickly, consistently, annually. These are our most popular projects that we have ever done. I will say that unequivocally. So finding a sustainable source that we don't have to explain ourselves all the time is fundamental to continuing that great work. And I was glad to hear Jody speak directly about signal hardware upgrades, and this was related again to that state of good repair. So they're not transit, transit required assets. These are life-required assets. Working, functional, visible traffic signals is core to our Vision Zero program. And so just, this is one of these pictures speaks a million words. So here you see Turk Street before 2014. Find that traffic signal. Oh, it's in the corner behind the tree, maybe. And we built a mass arm. This is a pretty basic improvement, and this significantly reduces red light running crashes. And this is the type of work we would like to do everywhere, but especially on our high injury network and especially in communities of concerns. And we have a really limited existing dollars for signal hardware upgrades. And moreover, when we upgrade traffic signals, we're doing this holistically. So it often includes a curb ramp. It often includes new lighting. And so we would like to request that the latter half of that $15 million Prop D goes specifically to signal hardware upgrades, especially in communities of concern or on the high injury network. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand this over to John. So we speak extensively about our infrastructure program, but a core and complement to our infrastructure program is our education programs. And I wanted to give him some space and time to sort of talk about how we work and what we've accomplished and where we'd like to see those programs going. So here you go, John.
Thank you very much. As I start, I want to make a couple of recognitions. I want to recognize the people who do most of the work on our Vision Zero, who are here and watching in the background. Wing, Christy, Sid, and many others. So thank you. I'm blessed to work with Hava and a lot of great people. I always like to start by centering our conversations around why we do this work, which is the people who are killed, but also the people who are left behind, the survivors, whether they're severe injuries or whether they're the family members. This is a campaign we ran about 3.5 years ago, just to continue to keep in front of our community why we talk about Vision Zero and why it's important. This is Julie Mitchell, who lost her son Dylan on the streets of San Francisco about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So really quickly, we wanted to take a few seconds to talk about how we think about education and outreach and communications, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Our work really tries not just to be behavior change work, but also to build a culture that understands Vision Zero and why it's important, and also builds support for the work that Hava does, for the work that the police department does, for the policy work that Kate's team is doing in San Francisco. So when we're approaching things, we're not really, we do know if we put up billboards that say please don't speed, that's not going to change people's behavior, or we would have solved speeding by now. So working with the public health department and whatnot, we've adopted a public health behavior change model, which really identifies 5 stages that every person must go through before they can actually have changed their behavior. And very, very quickly, as boiling a 20-minute presentation down into 5. Those stages are pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination, action, and maintenance. And what that basically means is that you have to become aware that there's a problem. Then you have to start becoming aware of why there's a problem. Then you have to start becoming aware that there are options to do something different so that there's not a problem. And only then can you be asked to take action to address the problem. And then because we're human and we can ask people who own gyms, right, in February, you might start a habit, but you need somebody there to help you continue that habit so that it's continuing. We have lots of things pulling at us and whatnot. So if we're not continuing to help maintain the habits and behaviors of folks will go back very quickly. So I'm using our speed campaign as kind of an example. This campaign was something that we ran and started in 2016. It was a partnership with the police department and the public health department. And essentially, we went out to the community and asked them what they know about speeding and what they think about speeding. And what we found out was you can't do it you can only do it on freeways. It's only when you're going 85 miles an hour. You can't do it in San Francisco because there's too much congestion on the streets, but they also knew all the streets where you could do it to get around that congestion. They also were not aware of the impact of speed, right? Part of our research that we identified was that if you go 5 miles an hour over the 25 mile an hour speed limit, you're twice as likely to kill somebody when you hit them with your car, or almost twice as likely. So we developed a campaign that was really, it was radio, it was social media, it was billboards and buses, it was the video that was running behind me is a partnership with the DMV. It is running in every single DMV office across the state and has been for the last 1.5 years on rotation. In just trying to, make sure people understand what the speed limit is in San Francisco, that even incremental changes above that have a big impact on our community, and really building an understanding that Havas projects are slowing the streets down, not because we're evil, but because we're trying to keep people safe. And we're advocating for automated speed enforcement in Sacramento because that is one of the things we need in order to keep people safe. And additionally, if you're driving a car, we need you to commit to sticking to the limit and driving that 25 miles an hour. I think we've talked a lot about evaluation. Our big campaigns, our speed campaign, our yielding campaign, our upcoming left turn campaign are all done in partnership with the Department of Public Health with just, and I'm going to brag for 2 seconds because it's not my work, it's the Department of Public Health's work. The rigor and hardcore evaluation that is done on these programs is really pretty phenomenal. And what we found through those evaluations is that we can change behavior, we can change awareness, and we can change an understanding of the issues behind that. What we've also understood or found is that after a month or so, if we're not continuously pushing these programs out there, everybody reverts back to the norm. That brings me to our ask. We were very blessed to have this board give us $2 million in 2016 for 2 years of education funding. We leveraged some grants and stretched that through the last December, but we are almost out of that money. The mayor's office has given us a small bridge gap funding to allow us to do a very, very bare minimum, a couple of outreach events a month between now and June. But basically, come July, our education outreach and communications program beyond media outreach and whatnot is going to stop unless we have funding. The grant opportunities out there are few and far between and are not a sustainable way to do this. And so we are here to ask this board to consider providing $1.2 million a year to fund Vision Zero education outreach and communications support. That comes down to about 2% of what the engineering ask is in this budget. And then if you add in all the traffic signal timing and whatever else, it's even less than that. But we think that in terms of building support for the engineering improvements that we need, it's an important piece that we need to continue going on. And I'll race through this. If we get that support, we will be able to continue our outreach, which we do every month throughout the community, multilingual. We talk to people where they live in stages 2 and 3 to talk about helping them understand where they feel unsafe and where they feel safe and what would it take to get them to feel safe on the roads that they feel unsafe in now. We will be doing multilingual education on speeding, yielding to pedestrians, safe turns, motorcycle safety, and also helping people understand how to use our innovative, we're doing so much innovative infrastructure work here. My favorite ongoing question is, can I drive in a green bike lane, right? We thought making it green sounded like, it highlights it. Other people thought it meant, oh, go, I can drive. We need to continue to tell people why we're doing bulb outs and things like this. Lastly, getting back to our original slide, we need to keep helping people remember why we're doing this, to keep people who have lost their lives, who have lost family members' lives, et cetera, front and centered, because that's the value of San Francisco, right? It's a livable city. It's about people. It's people-centered, and that's what Vision Zero is. And I think that continuing our outreach and awareness program will help us get there. So with that, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to go to questions now or...
I do.
Okay.
Okay.
I will.
Dr. Torres.
Thank you. So compared to cities of similar size,
Yes.
What are the pedestrian fatalities in those cities?
Oh, I thought there
We had that
was a
chart. We had that
slide.
chart
I think
earlier.
at the very, maybe Tom's presentation, he's nodding vigorously. We're comparatively fairly good. We have about, we try not to use a denominator because our goal does not have a denominator, right? Our goal is 0.
Right, right.
But if we're just asking ourselves a pure comparison, and Director Tumlin is currently handing you that slide, we have about 2.6 in 2018 fatalities per 100,000. And, I think we're only bested by a peer like Boston, which has an older city with narrower roads typically. Are we satisfied? No, I'm not satisfied with that
LA,
goal.
where I'm from originally, I mean, that has a 3-4 million population. We're only 800,000, so that's still, and we had 26 and LA had 47. What are
I'm
they
sorry,
doing?
I don't have that.
Those
These
are-
are per 100,000.
Per-
These are
that's per
deaths.
million.
It's crash rate.
Or, I'm sorry, per million, sorry.
Right.
Yeah, so they have 47 deaths per million, and we
Right.
have 26 deaths
Per
million.
800,000.
Also keeping in mind the United States is the most dangerous country in the developed world for traffic violence, and Oslo just went to 0 deaths.
Yeah, and they
So
are
is that an excuse or what?
No, it means
Challenge.
it's a challenge. So Oslo is about the size of San Francisco, and they have about
So
a
what
million.
efforts are being made to educate or to participate and force, if we can, obviously probably can't, are all these TNC companies in this town? Because most of their drivers, I think, are responsible for a lot of these fatalities. Because they're from out of town, they don't know the rules here. We can spend all this money educating people in San Francisco, but if they don't live here other than sleeping on the Great Highway on the weekends in order to make money in San Francisco, what kind of efforts are we doing outreach to Uber, to Lyft, to any of these other?
The answer is yes, to the extent that we are able. We have worked with both Uber and Lyft in the past to help them develop some videos that they agreed to show because we have, as you know, we have no
But
regulatory
they've
power.
not responded with any funding requests from us.
No, I don't believe we've asked for funding from them, but we do have our innovation team does work with them to identify ways to work with their drivers to make sure that their drivers have training. I know that also our regulation, Cape Tran and the innovation team are working right now with the CPUC around rules for the TNCs, and we push very hard for real training requirements.
Well, they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah, but I will say also when we've looked at citation data and whatever through the years, we do find that a lot of the collision data actually shows that the majority of them come from San Francisco. I have not looked at that data in the last year and a half, but I think it's important for us to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions, Director Eakin?
Thank you. A couple of questions. I guess just first one observation. It was notable that in the mode split latest data, we saw that walking accounts for exactly the same percentage of our mode share as transit does. So to me, your 1.2 million request is just it's a very modest request. I think we'll be happy to support it. I would ask, is that enough? And then given what you've done, what you've learned, and you said DPH has a real focus on implementation and monitoring and performance evaluation. I'd love for you to explain to us what you have learned through your outreach, who your targets are for the outreach, and how what you're going to do with the next 1.2 million sort of builds on and evolves and continuously improves from what you've learned to date.
Sure. Specific to how we're reacting to the outreach, I think looking at both our yield to pedestrians and speed campaigns, what we've learned is that for the most part, we are reaching drivers in a meaningful way. With the yield, we showed a 3%, over 6 weeks, we showed a 3% increase in drivers yielding to pedestrians at some controlled versus focus intersections. Again, that was a partnership with PD. So they were doing some enforcement, and then we did about 5 months of communications outreach and media work in support of that. I think what we've learned is that we have the right assets. What we need is the funds to get those out in front of the community and continue the conversation while also working with our partners at PD to make sure that they are using they have their new traffic, Vision Zero traffic enforcement squad, making sure that we're coordinating as tightly as possible the activities they're doing. So if we're focusing on yielding to pedestrians, they're out there doing yield to pedestrian work at the same time, and then we're working to leverage both our education materials and their enforcement to increase media exposure through KTVU or the papers, et cetera, which we've been pretty successful in doing. So similarly with the speed campaign, I think we've shown that we've put together the materials and the information that people need in order to change their behavior. We just need to get them back out in front of. It's more of a resource than those two campaigns. I don't know that we would propose to do significant tweaks to the campaigns. I don't know if that helps.
I'm really curious if seeing posters like this and billboards like this, does this actually motivate people to change their behavior, or are people motivated to change their behavior because they worry they're going to get a ticket, they worry they're going to get in trouble, and that's what's ultimately going to make them drive more slowly?
I think both. I think
in equal measure.
When we're talking about Vision Zero, the goal of this poster is not to ask somebody to change their behavior, right? The goal of this poster is to ask them to think about the impact of traffic violence in our community, so that they can get to a place that when we ask them to change their behavior, when they get a citation, et cetera, they are more primed and ready to take that action. Yeah. So this would be this is stage 2, which is you understand that there's a problem on the street, but you're not really aware of what that problem is, and so we're trying to humanize it, et cetera.
Okay, I'm gonna have Director Heminger has a question. I just want to remind everyone that we have one more portion of this presentation, and so we'll open it up to public comment after we have the last portion of this presentation. Director Heminger.
Maybe just to follow up, I'm struck by your slide about the transformative policy agenda, and it's 4 items that we need somebody else's permission to do. Right. So we've got a transformative policy goal of 0 deaths in 4 years, and our entire agenda is locked up in Sacramento unless we can spring it free. It strikes me that I think we need a plan B here. And look, we should certainly keep pouring it on with these items in Sacramento, but I just don't know how we can count on them. Certainly count on them by 2024. And what I've often heard about safety as an issue is the 3 E's, right? Education, engineering, enforcement. And it seems to me what we're short on, what we're shy on, is the enforcement piece. I do think people are not going to stop speeding until you bust them. And that message has got to get around, and that'll turn into your best awareness campaign. We've got a proposal later on in the agenda on the budget to hire a bunch of PCOs. I'm not quite sure what it's for, but what if they were all deployed in fixed post on the high injury network? And what if we had a matching amount from the SFPD, and we just, I think I used the phrase a few meetings ago, flood the zone, and try to deal with it that way. Obviously, it's not the most efficient. It's certainly not very high tech. But we've got a goal that we've got to get to in 4 years, and we're at 30 people right now. So I think we've got to try a different approach other than just waiting for Sacramento to say yes.
Well, and I just have to respond to that. The fascinating thing about what you're proposing, for a long time we've been told, well, we can't afford all the enforcement, it's so expensive, there's no way we can staff that. If you're talking about that as maybe an interim measure, until automated speed enforcement is approved in Sacramento. Maybe that comes 2024.
Yeah,
is not a
it.
permanent cost we have to take on. Maybe it's an interim bridge strategy. I think that's really provocative.
Well, and when we had the red light cameras, right, they would move the camera around. So a lot of the boxes didn't have a camera in them, but the boxes themselves scared people into sobriety. So in this case, these could be roving squads that, they're on this street one day and they're on that street the next day. And I mean, talk about raising awareness. That would really raise the awareness.
Great. So I think we're gonna, just for in the interest of time, move on to the next portion, which is improving transit safety. So Victoria and Kimberly, take it away.
Very good. Thank you. Good afternoon. Victoria Wise, Chief of Staff for the Sustainable Streets Division. Shifting gears a little bit, we know and we've heard that crime on our transportation system is down. But what we also have heard and know very well that the challenges that we have on our streets around homelessness, around mental health and other issues has made its way onto our transportation system, onto our buses and onto our facilities. And so, as you saw in an earlier slide, we got a B- from our customers on safety. And what I can also tell you is that our employees tell us also that they are concerned